Looking at a video game mashup is interesting in its own right, in the sense that you have this universe of MK, which has all these great characters and history around it and going behind it, and then you have this other history of the DC universe, which has been around even longer, which people have also great expectations. So you're trying to find a right way of blending it to make sense.
These are two separate licenses. The Mortal Kombat crew and the DC Universe crew, completely different characters, and getting them to get together and sort of create a story where they both kind of can work, interact, and destroy each other was a pretty big job. But that's what I kind of dig about doing this kind of work, is that it's something that's challenging.
A question that a lot of people keep asking me is, is this part of the canon of the MK world or the DC world? And the reality is, while based in those histories of those characters and the stories of those characters, they're not per se an extension of any current timeline, whether in the DC world or the MK world.
This game is set in the ultimate Elseworlds. It's the idea that we're not going to take like a specific time of the DCU because things change. So what we did is we created the classic characters, the characters at their best, at their peak. It's the characters that as a player. Even if you don't follow the comics, you definitely understand who these guys are and what they're doing.
It's kind of strange, really, working on these two licenses simultaneously and having to sort of serve two masters. We, on the MK side, have a lot of specific things that we're aiming for. We want this sort of brutal, violent story that, sort of interconnects all these different worlds. On the DC side, we want to really stay true to these characters that we don't really own.
It's really tough, to try to figure out, what will make sense, because you don't want to take some character or make Superman all of a sudden say, yeah, now he's vulnerable to, just an average person like Sub-Zero's uppercut. Why is he all of a sudden? Because before he could never take any damage. What's the reason? So, you're trying to find ways to blend the two universes, and we've kind of done that in our storyline to explain why certain characters have more abilities and why some characters' abilities have been kind of softened or dampened.
At the same time, you have to find these natural relationships between characters on different sides and figure out ways of balancing those relationships and balancing those powers and abilities and finding complements and finding natural nemeses between the two different sides, figuring out how to make everything kind of glue and fit together.
John Vogel and some of the other guys on the team would kind of get together in a room and they would kind of bang out all the details of how the story is going to work. They would define the big events that they wanted to happen. They would always say that they would write the beginning and write the end and then kind of combine the two together, and that was kind of how they would come up with the structure of what was taking place.
Figuring out how to get the two universes to come together in the storyline was not the hard part. That was kind of easy. We kind of came up with that concept really early on. And even what the bad guy was going to be, the concept for him was like the first day. We figured that out. The hard part was trying to create a story within the structure of the gameplay that we were trying to do.
My contribution was the format that the story is told in. I wanted it to be in chapters that were, starring one character. I didn't want to jump from Batman to the Flash to Green Lantern to Wonder Woman. I wanted to stick with the Flash for several fights because the player has to learn that character while he's playing it, and so we wanted to keep him with a familiar character for several fights and then move on to another character.
If you need a character to fight 4 times in a row, you pick 4 characters for him to fight against, or her, and you have to come up with, well, why does he fight these characters? And then when you have this next character that you fight as for 4 fights, what characters does that character fight against and why? And you really can't reuse the same characters that you just fought against. So fitting a story within the structure of the gameplay was a lot harder than coming up with the idea for how these two universes came together.
My involvement with the video game, MK vs. the DCU, was basically that Justin Gray and I, who's my writing partner, were brought in while the game was being in its infant stages to represent the DC side of the game, to make sure the characters were true, the dialogue was true, and the actions were true to the characters.
It was mostly to make sure that their characters and their world, the DC universe, was correct. because we were going to mess something up. We don't know everything about the DC universe, and these two guys did.
DC worries about their characters. They babysit those characters, and that's why we were here, and then of course why the Mortal Kombat side was there as well.
If we had written Batman says such and such, and it doesn't sound like something Batman would say, they would rewrite the line to make sure that it sounded like something that Batman would say.
It was a big, overwhelming game, and I got to say, you know, it was a great experience, but it's the first time we did something like this, and hopefully it's not the last.